Pastor Doug Klein. He has been married to his wife, Sean, for 32 years. She's with us this morning as well. They have 3 adult sons, Kyle, Cody, and Casey. Doug was blessed to be the pastor of Colonial Hills Baptist Church in Michigan for almost 29 years. He retired in 2017, and they now attend Calvary Baptist Church in Winston-Salem. So please give a warm welcome to Doug Klein, and we're glad he's here this morning.
It's a joy to be here with you and get to share God's Word for a little while with you here this morning. Kids, go to camp. Liberty is one of the greatest places in the world. Kyle knows that. So does Chandler as well. And it was some of the best years of my life. Met my wife there as well. So anyway, I'd encourage you to do that. Thank you for the special music, both of you. And you will see as we go along with this message how both of those songs will actually fit in with the message and interact with that as well. For several years while I was pastoring, I would go to Atlanta for a conference. And I did this probably about 8 years in a row, something like that. My real father lived in Atlanta, and so I'd go down, I would stay with him, we'd play a little golf, I'd go to the conference and such. And there was a worship leader there, and he, for a couple years in a row, was leading the singing and the worship for this conference, did a fantastic job. And the next year I went back, and he wasn't up there, and they had some others, but I just thought, okay, it's someone different and such. Well, partway through the conference and such, they shared that young man's story. And quite honestly, it took us all off guard. And they said in that year that had passed, he had developed cancer, and he was just a young man in his 20s. And of course, that changed the whole thought pattern and the mood and those that were thinking there to grasp that and feel the weight of that for a minute. And he went on to say that that young man had trusted Christ as a Savior before, but his family, his parents and such, were not believers. And while he was in the hospital, his father came to visit him. And his dad, of course, was just brokenhearted, as any of us would be, was just struggling with everything, and tears in his eyes as he's talking to his son, who was laying there in the hospital. And his son looked up at him and he said, "Dad, it's okay. Either way, I win. Either way, I win." That young man would pass away, and he won. He got to be with the Lord. And after his funeral, his father would trust Christ as a Savior as well. And I share that story because, let's be honest, there are times when it is hard to have faith. There are times when it's hard to trust in God. And in Daniel chapter 3, where I'd like you to turn this morning, we know this story, or many of us know this story, if you've been around church for a long time, about 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who really put their faith and trust in God. Now, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, a verse that many of us have memorized and know by heart, is trust in the Lord with all of your heart, all of our heart, and lean not on our own understanding. In all of our ways acknowledge Him, and He, meaning God, will direct our paths. Amen. Now, we know that verse, and we have memorized that verse, many of us, and yet, how do we do when the rubber meets the road? How do we bring that verse into play when various things happen in our life? Because let's be honest, you and I will face real life situations as we go through our days. No doubt maybe last year in 2019, things didn't go the way that you had thought they would go. For some, it's a financial burden, and it's not quickly removed. And that's real life, isn't it? Things like that happen. How about when we trust God for a healing in someone's life, and that recovery is not going to happen? For Sean and I, we learned just a few weeks ago that my stepdad is now in hospice, and he's able to stay at home, but they've stopped certain medications and stuff because it's not doing any good anymore. What about when his will seems so much different than ours, and what we want or what we are hoping for or what we are looking for? And as we, and hopefully we do, pray through those various situations in life, will we continue to trust God even though He may work in a way that is different than what you and I expect? Because let's be honest, we can plan things for God, can't we? In fact, it's easy for us to do that. God, this is how things should go. This is the way I want it all to work out. And we can do a great job if we were God's planner. No, we couldn't. No, we couldn't. But we face those tough times. And there will be times when our will conflicts with God's will. There will be times when the path that God chooses for us is different than the path that we may be on, or different from the path that we wish we had. There will be times when our prayers will not be answered in the way that we had hoped. Now, I'm not trying to start this service in a negative way. In fact, this is all going to flip, and it is a very positive story. And in fact, anytime we put our faith and trust in God, it is positive. But the Bible records for us various situations. We can go through the Bible and see things don't always happen the way we expect or the way that we want. Abraham. I mean, what a great story of faith. I love that in Genesis 12 where it says, he went out not knowing where he was going. How amazing is that? You see, when you and I plan, we almost always know the destination. We almost always know what God has for us. But no, he says he went out not knowing the destination. Then later on in his life, he waited 25 years for that son Isaac. Joseph, one of the most faithful people in the Scriptures, for a period of time faced problem after problem after problem after problem, even though he was upright and righteous in every one of those situations that he faced. Paul referred to a thorn in his flesh. Something, and many believe it's some type of illness perhaps, that had it for years, God never took it away. Trust in the Lord with all our heart. Lean not on our own understanding. In all of our ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct the paths that we take. Now in Daniel chapter 3, again, if you're familiar with this story, great. Hopefully this is just reinforces the faith in this story that is found. If this is new to you, I hope it's a fascinating Bible story. It is a real and true Bible story, and I hope that you're amazed by the faith of these men. And in Daniel chapter 3, we read of these men. Their names again are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But in verse 1, it says the king, whose name was Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon at that time, it says that he makes this image of gold. And in verse 1, you see a little bit of a description. And basically, to paraphrase it, it's about 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. They put it out on the plain of Dura, it says, and something 90 feet tall is going to be able to be seen from a distance. And so that's why he set it up there. There were no mountains around. It was just wide open field, and there is this huge image standing up there in the middle of the field. It is referred to in verse 1 as an image. So it means it depicts something. It depicts something. Maybe it was an image of himself. Maybe it was one of their many, many gods that they had. Who knows, maybe there was images of God after God after God after God in their culture that they had. We don't really know. But an image of gold, 90 feet high, shows, or was meant to show, power, greatness, maybe even a little bit of ego as well. At verse 2, it goes on and begins to tell us that there's going to kind of be a ceremony, a ribbon cutting ceremony, so to speak, to dedicate that image. And you see down there in verse 2, it says, and he summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all other provincial leaders to come to the dedication of the image that he had set up. The who's who of Babylon was to be there. I mean, this was something you did not want to miss. All of these people were there. And then King Nebuchadnezzar says, this is what the protocol is going to be in verses 5 and 6. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down, in other words, there's consequences here, and worship will immediately be thrown into the blazing fire. Now let me just say something right off. It says immediately be thrown into the blazing fire, so what does that mean? Fire's burning already. I mean, it was meant to kind of scare people a little bit. It was meant to kind of remind you of what you were supposed to do, or else it was burning already. And so, again, King Nebuchadnezzar lays out this protocol. Word's going to go out. And verse 7 tells us that's what he did. All of a sudden, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, I can't say that word this morning, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Picture yourself as him. How proud he must have been as that image was set up there. All of these people are bowing down to him. And for him, I'm sure, this measure of ego, this measure of pride, this measure of all of these people recognize who I am is on their minds and in his heart. And he sees all of that. And he is just so excited that everything has happened. The ceremony is going fantastic. People are recognizing the greatness of Babylon and the greatness of King Nebuchadnezzar. At least somewhere. And then all of a sudden, here come the tattletales, right? Here come the tattletales of this story. Starting in verse 8, it says, "At this time some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, 'May the king live forever.' Then they remind him, as if he needed to be reminded of his decree and everything that had just happened, but they remind him, 'Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all the kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold.' Do you remember that, king?" Obviously, yes. I remember that. 3 guys didn't bow down, king. In fact, there's some of the Jews that you have brought in and placed them in positions. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they did not bow down. They do not serve your gods, nor do they worship this image of gold that you have put up and that you have required that everyone bow down to worship. In verse 13, we see his response. It says that he is furious with rage. He is ticked. He is furious with rage. Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And you see, he is really angry right now. And later on it says, in his face, you can just see that anger. All of us have seen someone that is angry before. And you just see it in their face. And that was him. And anger also almost always accompanies ego as well. They kind of go hand in hand. So these 3 men now will stand before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar, again, he's furious. He calls them there. And the king questions them. Let me get the facts straight. Let me make sure this is really how it went. Let me make sure that what these guys are telling me is true. Because I don't think it's true, guys. And he says, "Is it true that you do not serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up?" He is angry. He's mad. He's upset. He has been full of rage. His ego is just burning within him. And he's surprised that anyone would disobey the king, especially considering the punishment. And again, the fire is still burning. That furnace is still heated up. But he says, "I'm going to give you a second chance. I'm going to give you a second chance." He says there in verse 15, "Again, we'll strike up the band. Again, we'll let all the music play. We're going to let that happen. If you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, very good. All is well. That would be perfect. All is forgiven. But if you do not worship it, you'll be thrown immediately into the blazing fiery furnace." And then notice what he says. "Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Who is that God who is able to deliver you from my hand? You see, many of the ancient cultures believed their kings were gods. And the Babylonians were like that as well. And so, who is the God who is going to be able to deliver you from my hands? And basically what he's saying is, I am greater than any God. That is what Nebuchadnezzar was saying. I am greater than any God. Their response is the beauty of this story. Their response is phenomenal. I mean, it is just amazing. I encourage you to go home later and just read through this all again, because it shows their faith. And you see, People in this world today and people in society today, they get upset when we have faith outside of Christianity. And they say, you can have your faith, just keep it to yourself. We don't want to see your faith on display. And what they don't understand is we can't. Or at least we shouldn't. Because faith is meant to be lived out. It is meant to be seen. It is meant to be displayed. It is meant to affect the decisions that you and I make in our everyday life. And so when they say to us, just keep your faith to yourself, we can't. Besides, none of them keep anything to themselves either. We won't get into all that. But anyway, their faith is on display. And notice what they say. We do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. I love that. And if I could put it this way, here's what they're saying. We don't even need to think about it. We don't need time. We don't need to go, huddle up with each other. We don't need to go pray about it. We don't need to go talk to someone else about it. We don't need to fetch someone else to seek their advice upon this. We do not even need to think about our answer. We know exactly what we are going to do. And if you're familiar with the story of Daniel at all, these guys, they seem to do that all the time. If you go back to Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, it says, but Daniel resolved in his heart not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief officer for permission not to defile himself in this way. He purposed in his heart ahead of time. And by the way, I think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, before they had these new names, they were there as well. They had purposed in their heart ahead of time. If we can say it this way, know what we're going to do in advance. Right? In baseball, they say, hey, know where you're going to go with the ball. If it comes to you, if it's hit to you. I remember coaches telling me that. I remember me telling my son that as he played baseball as well. Think about it ahead of time. Well, they had it in their heart. They knew exactly what they were going to do when faced with some of the difficult decisions in our life. And hopefully you and I do the same. Now, I know there's going to be times when we struggle, and I know there's going to be times when we are trying to figure it all out, and there are times when we really are going before the Lord to seek His wisdom and His guidance, but there are times when it should come very easily. It should come very quickly that we know exactly what we're going to do. But this was a tough one. I mean, they knew the fire was burning. They knew what was going on. But this part is the beauty of this whole story. And there are three different significant parts to their response. Number one was their faith. Their faith in God. He was their vision, as the song said. They understood that they could trust their God. And it says, the God we serve, verse 17, is able to deliver us from it. And He will deliver us from His majesty's hand. The God we serve, not your gods, not your false gods, not the other ones that are on that image that you had set up, not any of those other ones that are placed around the kingdom in different ways. Our God, the one we serve, is able to deliver us from His majesty's hand. That was a direct response to King Nebuchadnezzar's egotistical statement a little while ago when he said, who is the God that will be able to deliver you from my hands? That was a direct response to his egotistical comment, and I'll be honest, it took a lot of guts for them to say that. It took a lot of guts for them to say that. But they actually have the faith to believe that God can deliver them from a burning, fiery furnace. Now again, the amazing aspect of their faith is not that they'll trust God right before they're getting pushed in. You see, the amazing faith of Daniel is not when he was in the lion's den. It was the 60, 70, 80 years before that when he walked with God day by day, day by day, day by day, that got him into the lion's den in the first place. Because remember, he would also not stop praying for 30 days to his God. That's their faith. That is their faith. We believe that God can do a miracle. All our hope is in Jesus. All our hope is in God, is what they believed. The second one after faith is trust. And I know these two are always very, very similar. But these to me are some of the most amazing words in the Scriptures. Verse 18, but even if He does not. But if not, Because, folks, we will all face, but if not situations, as you and I walk our years on this earth. There will be times when it's not going to turn out the way that we had thought or the way that we had hoped. But they say, but if not. If not. This is, to me, one of the greatest verses or greatest statements on trust in all of the Word of God. We trust God to deliver us from that burning fiery furnace. But if not, we're not going to bow down. They realize that God may choose not to deliver them from this burning fiery furnace. Go on into Hebrews chapter 11 and you read through that hall of fame of what we know as faith, and you get partway through that chapter after reading about Abraham and reading about Moses and reading about all these great people in the Word of God about faith. And what does it say? There were some that were martyred. There were some that were sawn in two. There were some, and they go on with how they actually died because of their faith. They realize that God may choose not to deliver them, and yet, like this young man in that story I told you earlier who said, Dad, it's all right. Either way, I win. They were content with whatever God chooses to do. And Paul put it this way in the New Testament. When he was in prison, he says, hey, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. If you let me live here, I'll keep talking about Him. I'll keep preaching about Him. I'll keep sharing about this God that I love so much and Jesus and what He has done for me. And if you take my life, I'll get to go be with Him. Hey, what do you want to do? That's his attitude. You choose, guys, because either way is great for me. Unbelievable to think that. Unbelievable to have that type of attitude. And yet that is what these three men had. That's what Paul had. And that's the attitude that you and I can have as well. So faith is an important aspect of that statement. Trust is an important aspect of that statement. And last of all, obedience was an aspect of that statement. We will not bow down to your images. We are not going to bow down to your idols. We are not going to do that. These two verses, these few verses, epitomize trusting God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all our mind, and with all our strength, to love the Lord thy God as well. There's a lady named Barbara Johnson who has written books over the years, and she is quoted as saying this: sometimes God calms the raging storm, and sometimes He lets the storm rage, and He calms His child. You ever hear Him say that we can have this peace inside of us? That's what she's talking about. Even in the midst of these difficult situations, even though the storm is raging all around, how is it that we can have this peace within us? Because of Christ. You see, as James talks about faith and works, and as he talks about those things, basically he was telling us faith equals works, which equals our lifestyle. Not that we work to earn our salvation. Don't get me wrong there. I think you know what I mean. That if we have faith and trust in God, we are going to serve Him. We are going to serve others. We are going to love Him. We're going to love others. That's the gist of the Ten Commandments. First 4, love God. Last 6, love others. Faith equals works equals life. Well, the king is furious, as we might have guessed was happening. I mean, he's full of rage in this moment. The fire is burning, and guess what he says? Hey, stoke it up even hotter. Like it's going to matter, right? None of us want to be thrown into the fire no matter how hot it is. Like that's going to matter, but he is so upset. He doesn't say, just make it hotter. He says 7 times hotter. Into the furnace you go. Verse 19, it says Nebuchadnezzar is furious. He is so upset with these men that it says his attitude changed towards him. The facial expressions began to change again. He is so upset. He is so upset with them. That anger, that shock, maybe even a little embarrassment on his part, but that smirk of ego. Earlier in chapter 2, he had been humbled by Daniel's responses to him. And Daniel's answers, not now. I don't know how much later this took place, but not now. Pride, ego, arrogance, and anger are controlling his life. And so the king gives the command, and starting in verse 19, again, he ordered the furnace heated up. He commanded his strongest soldiers in his army to tie them up, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and throw them into the blazing fiery furnace. And then notice what it says. This is important. So these men, these are some details. These men wearing their robes, their trousers, their turbans, and other clothes were bound and thrown into the blazing fiery furnace. Everything into the furnace. Heat it up hotter. Tie them up. Like that's going to make a big difference too, But tie them up. He wants no chance at all of them to be able to escape. No chance at all of them to be able to get out of this situation that they are in. Tie them up, throw them in. And it's what happened, verse 21. They were thrown into the fiery furnace. The fire was so hot that those who threw him in were burned up and killed. And all of us, again, we've been around a campfire, the little grill that we're working on, and all of a sudden that heat kicks up and we kind of step back because we feel that pressure. I don't know how firemen do it. I could not do that job. But we kind of grasp that a little bit. They fell down dead because they were just near the fire. Not even in it. They were just near it. But it also says that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were thrown in, they were tied up, so they kind of stumbled, and they fell down into the furnace, and they're bound and they're tied up. Then the king is watching the fire, right? Again, gloating a little bit, seeing what happens, seeing what's going on. And he watches the fire, and from a distance, probably, again, gloating a little bit. And then all of a sudden, as he's kind of looking into that furnace there a little bit, he noticed there's something different. Something strange is going on. In all honesty, something he had never seen before. And he asked the question, hey, wait a minute. Didn't we cast 3 men bound into that burning fiery furnace? And of course the answer was yes. Then he says this, how come I see 4? How come I see 4 and the 4th one looks like the Son of God? Now I'll be honest, I don't know how he could tell that, but he knew. He could tell. Something happened to him at that moment, his spirit as well, that he would grasp that. And of course God did that. But he sees 4. Because the Spirit of God, the 4th, that Jesus was with them. And then he does something that he had never done before. This was never done before. He walks up a little closer, again, as close as he could get without it really affected him. And he talks to the fire. Specifically talks to the men in the fire. But he talks to the fire. I doubt he had ever done that before. But he gets as close as he can and he speaks and he says, listen, servants of the Most High God. That wasn't his attitude just a little while ago, was it? Who is that God that's going to deliver you out of my hands? I am greater than any God. No one is going to be able to rescue then. Servants of the Most High God. And then he also says something he had never said before. Come out and come here. See, no one had ever survived anything like that before. Come out and come here? He believed it could happen. He was convinced at that point. Something not right is going on. Something strange is going on. You guys come on out of there. And what a sight this must have been. What a sight this must have been. One thing I do not like about a campfire is you usually have them at night and then you go to bed. And you're laying there and you smell the smoke and now your pillow smells like smoke. And we don't like it. That smell of smoke is just easy to detect, isn't it? Easy to detect. Not here. Even though that fire is burning over there, they do not smell like smoke one bit. They are not singed. They are not burned. Nothing is wrong with their clothing. Absolutely nothing happened to them. That fire had absolutely no effect on them whatsoever. And then look at verse 29. This is Nebuchadnezzar speaking. Well, let me go back to 28. He says, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. Then listen to these last few words. For no other God can save in this way. Folks, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, just preached. For there is no other God who can save in this way. He just preached. He just preached a great message. In fact, if you don't remember anything else I say or any of the other music that was done today, there is no other God that can save the way that God can. Now, folks, the rubber's going to hit the road for us at times. All of us can look back at times in our life and things didn't happen the way that we thought they were going to happen. And sometimes the healing didn't come. Sometimes the financial help that we had hoped for didn't come. And we face difficulties because of that. We will face these times in our life. How are we going to handle those but if nots? How are we going to handle those? There's a few things that we can remember. God is always faithful. He is always faithful. He cannot not be faithful. I know that's not proper English, but that's he cannot not be faithful. It is His character. It's who He is. We're going to be faithless at times. We're going to be unfaithful at times. But He is always faithful. And so when we demonstrate our faith in Him, we are living it. We are expressing it. We are showing it. We are putting it into the decisions and all the aspects of our life. Number 2, trust His heart, even if it doesn't make sense to us. Trust His heart. There is no one that loves us like God does. There is no one who loves us and cares about us more than God, even when it doesn't make sense. Years ago, when my kids were little, you buy all the movies and stuff, and back then they were VHS and stuff, so it tells you a little bit about my age and the age of my children and such. But so we had all the Disney movies, Bambi and all those Disney movies and stuff. Well, one of them was Joseph. I was kind of shocked that Disney had made a story about Joseph, but it was actually pretty good and such. And in the video, or in that movie, as we're watching it, there's this scene where Joseph is kind of down in the prison, and there's like little light coming through up the top and everything. And as Joseph is in this prison and he's trying to figure it all out, again, he had been faithful. He had followed God. And all of a sudden, this song, he starts singing. And he says this in the song. You know better than I, you know the way. I'll let go of my need to know why, 'cause you know